Before we start, I want to state that we feel extremely sad about thousands of people who lost their lives in recent devastating earthquakes in Turkey. And we want to extend our deepest condolences to their relatives and the loved ones. Okay, now, as I said, we are now organizing this webinar as two national associates. And let me talk about our motivation for this webinar, first of all. Actually, for the last 1 year, we have been working hard together with TASI as two national associations to organize a joint international conference, which will be held in Antalya, Turkey in November 2023. On our side, we plan the 7th International Conference on Earthquake Engineering and Seismology, whereas TASI is organizing the 18th World Conference on Seismic Isolation, Energy Dissipation, and Active Vibration Control of Structures under the auspices of ASISI, which is the Anti-Seismic Systems International Society. But, anyhow, what happened is a very unfortunate event on February 6th. And then we were, of course, all focused on the post-earthquake disaster management actions by going to the earthquake-affected sites multiple times. Members of both national associations worked in the field together with many national and international teams for weeks in order to get the perishable field data that will be the basis of earthquake engineering research for the next decade, perhaps more. Well, today we are going to make our webinar, and we believe that this unfortunate earthquake imposed us a great responsibility in the upcoming joint conference to exchange some knowledge and data of this recent earthquake between researchers, and also to discuss what to do next in order to mitigate the earthquake losses in future earthquakes in populated and earthquake-prone regions. So I think this webinar will also serve as a harbinger of the joint conference. Okay, now today we have many distinguished members of the EAT and TASI from different disciplines, which are going to make some presentations regarding their observations and comments about the February 2023 Turkey earthquake sequence. And if time allows, we can take some questions through the chat screen. So let me start the webinar with Dr. Ayşegül Askan, who is a faculty member in Civil Engineering Department of Millis Technical University. She is going to talk about seismological aspects of the Kahramanmaraş earthquake sequence.
All right, so hello to everyone. We thank all of you for your being here, and we would like to share our first initial assessments of the earthquake. And I would like to start with the regional tectonics and recorded ground motions. Here is the tectonic setting of Turkey. Turkey is located on a very seismically very active fault zone. We have the North Anatolian fault zone that is very well known in the globe that separates our Anatolian block from the Euro-Asian plate. It's a strike slip, right lateral strike slip fault zone. But then we have another major fault zone, which is the East Anatolian fault zone, where we had the recent earthquakes, and it separates the Anatolian block from the Arabian plate. Now, why is Turkey seismically so active? Because our rate of crustal deformation is very high, because the African and the Arabian plates are pushing Turkey northward. That's why we're actually moving and rotating towards southwest, which causes a significant amount of earthquakes every year. The historical events before we had the recent ones, actually, I'm showing you a figure from a study in year 2002, before we had the Bingöl and the Elazığ earthquakes. I'm showing you the historical events. Now we will see how nature actually fills the gaps. We had the 1800 event along the fault zone. This is right here, the Dead Sea fault zone. Here is the East Anatolian fault zone. We have an event about 1100s and 1500s. The locations are not very clear, but this is the information we had in year 2002. And fast forward, in year 2003, we had the Bingöl earthquake. This gap is filled right there. And now we had the 2010 Elazığ, the first event north in the same fault zone. And the stress really moved to the southwest. And we had the 2020 Elazığ, the second event. And the only gap that was right here are the USGS fault planes, is actually the event one, the Pazarcık earthquake, as I will call it, and the Elbistan or Ekinözü earthquake, the second one. So really the earthquakes, the locations of the earthquakes were among the major seismic gaps in our country. Here is another view of the area with the left lateral character that actually is a very dominant property of this fault zone. We had the first event, which had ruptured about 400 kilometers, followed by a 200 kilometer. And these are the USGS assigned MW values of 7.8 and 7.5. Did we really think about these earthquakes? Are they anticipated? Did we do any studies in the region before? Yes, we did. This is an METU group with some colleagues who were formerly at USGS. And this is an SRL paper after the 2010 event. The Coulomb stress analysis done by our colleagues showed that the level of stress really may induce the seismicity in the adjacent active fault. Remember, this was followed by the 2020 earthquake after 10 years. And another study that we had performed in our research group was the Gaziantep resilience study, which was practically simulating earthquakes on the Dead Sea fault zone closer to Gaziantep, and then finding out mean damage ratios, as I show you on the right figure over here. And we had concluded that there's a high seismic hazard in this region, coupled with the vulnerability, it may cause actually significant damage. Another one, which actually proved that nature was faster than science, we had an AFAD-funded national project that was an urban resilience evaluation. It was a multidisciplinary project in Maraş, Türkoğlu, in Kahramanmaraş, Türkoğlu region, which is right here. And these figures on the right are not done after the earthquake. They were plotted about 10 months before the earthquake. We were simulating 7.46 and 7.3 events. But as you know, what happened is 5 different segments ruptured on this fault zone. Instead of the 7.5, we had the 7.8. Here is a special distribution of peak ground motion parameters for the first event. We have near field stations that are mostly on the fault. On this line, you're going to see, which resulted in high peak ground acceleration values, but even higher PGV values. When we compare them with the GMMs, you will see that PGV values are significantly higher for this earthquake. We have values along the fault zone that reach 150 centimeters per second. Another way of looking at the accelerations is spectral accelerations for the short-story buildings and the high-rise buildings for 0.2 and 1 second. And when you look at the numbers, you will see that the area was really shaken with very high spectral accelerations. Well, a similar observation could have been done for the second event. This is the second event, but you can see that the near-field station distribution is not as dense as the first one. We have a Göksun station here, which was severely damaged, unfortunately, and we have pretty high ground motion values, which is the same for the spectral acceleration values for short and long periods. Unfortunately, from this event, the amount of near-field data is very limited. When I look at the computed MMI values, I can tell you very easily and very shortly that these are the highest computed MMI values for any event in Turkey. That is almost equivalent to the 1939 event, Erzincan event, and maybe even more than that. We have values reaching up to 10, 11 values, MMI values. Of course, these are computed, and in the field, we are working to assign observed MMIs or EMS 98 values. It's a little less for the second earthquake, but we have values near 10 and 9 mostly, which really is very close to total destruction. So The recorded motions I'm going to discuss very briefly, but I will give you a reference for you to go and check if you have time. We have been working on the data sets with our colleagues, and that is the chapter 4 of the METU EERC report. You can find it online. We had issues on the data quality in the beginning. We had multiple wave packets, and we were suspecting velocity pulses in this large event. So we had to deal with the high pass values, the low cut values very carefully. Very quick inspections. I have selected some stations. This is a station in Islahiye, Gaziantep, where the damage was very severe. We are above the maximum design earthquake in the Turkish earthquake code, the most recent one. And for the longer periods, we are even exceeding the maximum credible earthquake. And look at the multiple wave packets because of the great length of the rupture. Now, there's a question mark here because the AFAD later removed this record saying that there was an accumulator problem that fell off during the event, but we will work on this record in detail. So then another one in Hatay, you can see the ground motions that is here near the fault zone. It has very low Arab value. Here also, you can see the broadband nature of the response spectra. And when we look at the velocities, which don't have time for that today, this record indicates some forward directivity effects. Another station in Kırıkhan, again, in a very highly damaged region, very wide spectra. And I want to show you how wide that is. That is usually not what engineers do, but this is a trial with my student, Abdullah. This is a video that shows you with the cumulative arrival of the waves, the entire spectrum is really covered. I'm going to play it once again just to show you. With the multiple wave packets, entire period domain has really high spectral acceleration value. This is, again, has a very small Arab value. The second event, this is the Göksun station. This is an interesting response spectra for me. Pseudo-spectral velocities are also interesting. You can find them in the publications soon. We have two peaks here. That is very obvious. And I'm suspecting we actually had shaken structures with different fundamental frequencies right here. They are very, very high values above the code level. Now, a comparison against GMMs for the first event, well, I can tell you very shortly, this is Bur and others, and this is Kale and others, and GA West 2 on the left for PGA and PGV, and Kale and others, a local one for PGA and PGV. We can say that PGA is confirmed the median. We are not very much deviating, but PGVs are much higher than anticipated values. Now, a similar observation for the short period accelerations on the top and the long period accelerations on the bottom. I can tell you that long period spectral accelerations are mostly higher than the models for shorter distances, and short period spectral accelerations are okay at the short distances, but they deviate at larger distances. How extreme were these events? When people ask us about the ground motions, it's always good practice to compare it with the global data. The stations are not here, I'm sorry, but these are the highest, the earthquake names and the magnitudes. These are the highest ground motions in the NGA West 2 database. And look at the Hatay records, the blue, red, the thick ones, and the green one. So this event produced among the really largest data in the NGA West 2. Okay, this is one of my rare photos that I will show you today because my colleagues will discuss more. This is a left lateral strike slip fault zone, and you can see that the road has actually moved about 3 meters that we measured with Mustafa Koçgar approximately. This is a textbook photograph that I wanted to share with you today. This is the fault structure. I'm sure you're going to see more pictures coming up soon. Okay, what are the implications for future seismic hazard map? Our seismic hazard map is very recently renewed. It's a PSHA-based map, and we had a long evolution of seismic hazard maps in Turkey. We have to think about the hazard map, whether we will think about multi-segment ruptures, because we didn't consider this much of a rupture in the hazard map. We have to think about sources and scenarios. Of course, this map is for engineering rock conditions, and we amplify with site amplifications in the code. So how about the code and the design spectra? We will have to think about the long periods. We will have to consider basin effects. Hatay is a basin that is amic plain, and it's between the really high mountainous area. We have to think about near fault effects. It's not easy to characterize all this. We have to reconsider site amplifications and liquefaction, as my geotechnical professors will discuss. And Finally, AST has now switched to a multi-period spectrum. Maybe we will think about those in the future. I am not a person who wants to change the code after every extreme event, but we will have to examine these events and the ground motions in detail given the results. So a short summary, we had 2 consecutive events, very long ruptures, high ground motions, produced high PGV values overall. We have strong velocity pulses due to directivity effects in Hatay. We have a long period content enhancement and a broadband response spectra. I have been thinking of these earthquakes as a consecutive force vibration tests on the structures. Approximately, these numbers might change. Approximately about 25 to 30% of buildings may be in moderate damage or more than that, collapse and severe damage. The event has to be examined in layers. Sources, paths, site effects, and structures. We will do it in the upcoming months. I always think about the memory effect. I think about Elazığ 2010 and 2020 earthquakes. Those ground motions are not very small given the MW values, but the city was more prepared because of an earthquake that happened 10 years prior. So some questions to ask. Our fault map, hazard map, and code are all recently updated. What further updates are necessary? How do we do the relocations in these cities while considering the settlements? My 2 conclusions before I give the word to my colleague. We have to bridge science and local decision making. The link is sometimes weak. It is weaker in the developing regions, I have to admit that. And we have to have code enforcement and construction supervision. And I here leave a note, our global constructions made by really well-known Turkish firms show that it's not about the earthquake engineering really designs, but it's more about the construction practices and the construction supervision in the site for the small scale construction sector. This is, of course, my own personal conclusion. You can find the reports here at the ERC METU websites, and we have a large report by the Turkey Earthquake Reconnaissance and Research Alliance that touch base to all the points. I thank all of you, and I'm going to stop share and give the word to my moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Askın, for your presentation.